I am telling this story now with gray hair and slower hands, but I remember that morning as if it were carved into my bones. The Miami cruise terminal was already alive when I arrived. Rolling suitcases echoed across concrete floors. Families laughed too loudly, children ran in circles, couples took photos with the ship behind them as if nothing in life could ever go wrong. I stood there among them with my own suitcase beside my feet, a wide straw hat on my head, sunscreen still sticky on my cheeks, feeling something I had not felt in years. Hope. At 62, hope does not come easily. You learn to keep expectations small so disappointment hurts less. But that day I had allowed myself to dream. It was supposed to be my first cruise. My son Ethan had planned it months ago. He said it was a family vacation, something we deserved after years of work and stress. I believed him because I wanted to. I had raised Ethan alone after his father died. 2 jobs. Missed holidays. Cheap dinners. No complaints. I told myself that standing in that terminal was proof that sacrifice eventually comes back as reward. I remember adjusting my sunglasses and checking my phone again. No messages. Ethan was late, which was normal. Since marrying Claire, time seemed to bend around her needs, not his promises. I sat on a metal bench near the boarding area and watched other families arrive together, arms linked, moving as one unit. I imagined us like that. Me, Ethan, Claire, and the kids. I imagined laughing at dinner, watching the ocean at night, being included without having to earn my place. I had even bought 3 new dresses for the formal dinners. Simple dresses, nothing expensive, but chosen carefully like a girl preparing for her first dance. I smiled to myself, embarrassed by my own excitement. Then my phone vibrated. At first I thought it was a boarding alert or a reminder notification. I looked down casually, still smiling. It was a message from Ethan. Just a few lines. No greeting. No explanation to soften the words. Mom, plans changed. You're not coming on the cruise. Claire thinks it should be just the immediate family. We'll talk when we're back. I read it once without understanding. I read it again slower. Then again. Each time the words stayed the same. Just the immediate family. My fingers went cold. The noise around me faded, as if someone had closed a door inside my head. Immediate family. I was not that. Not anymore. I lifted my eyes and that was when I saw them. On the upper deck, leaning against the railing. Ethan, Claire, my 2 grandchildren. They were laughing. Claire brushed her hair back with one hand and pointed at something for the kids to see. Ethan looked down at his phone. I wondered if he was checking whether I had read the message. I wondered if he felt relief. I did not wave. They did not look for me. Or maybe they did and pretended not to see. In that moment, memories rushed in without permission. Ethan at 8 years old crying after losing a soccer game. Ethan at 17 asking if we could afford college. Ethan at 30 asking me to help with a down payment on a house. I had always been there. Always. And now I was sitting alone on a cold bench, surrounded by strangers, holding a phone that told me I was excess. People passed me carrying excitement while I sat frozen. I felt foolish for the dresses. Foolish for the hope. Foolish for believing that love given automatically returns. My chest tightened but no tears came. Just a deep hollow feeling, like something essential had finally cracked. I stood up slowly, picked up my suitcase, and walked away from the terminal without looking back. Each step felt unreal, like I was watching myself leave from a distance. The taxi ride home was quiet. The driver talked about traffic. I nodded when appropriate. When I entered my apartment, the silence hit me harder than the message. This place had once felt warm. Now it felt like a waiting room where no one would ever call my name.
I set my suitcase down and walked straight to my small home office.
There was a drawer I had avoided for years. Inside it, a blue folder. Inside that folder, the truth. The deed to the house Ethan lived in. The house I had bought for him and his family. The house I had paid off with my retirement money. The house that was still legally mine. I sat there holding the papers, my hands shaking, and for the first time that day, I understood. The message at the port was not sudden. It was the final piece of a pattern I had refused to see. I was not family. I was function. And sitting alone in that quiet room, something inside me shifted forever. That afternoon stretched endlessly, as if time itself had slowed to force me to sit with what I was finally beginning to understand. I remained at my desk long after the sun shifted across the living room floor, the blue folder open in front of me like an accusation.
The house deed lay there, calm and unquestionable, carrying more truth than all the polite conversations I had endured over the years. I traced my name on the paper with my finger.
It was still there. It had always been there. And suddenly I saw how little that had mattered to them, because they never believed I would dare to act like it mattered. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, letting memories rise one by one. They did not come dramatically. They arrived quietly, like small stones being placed on my chest. Holidays when I was invited late, always after plans were already made. Birthdays where I was asked to help pay for gifts but not consulted about the celebration. Weekends when I offered to cook and was told Claire needed space to build her own family rhythm. I had accepted those words like a reasonable woman, like someone modern and understanding. I told myself that love meant stepping back. What I never allowed myself to see was that stepping back had slowly turned into being pushed out. I thought about the house again. 5 years earlier, Ethan had stood in that empty living room, eyes wet, voice full of gratitude. He had hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Claire had cried too, saying how lucky they were to have me. They promised Sunday dinners.
Promised family gatherings.
Promised I would always be welcome. Over time, those promises dissolved into polite distance. Dinners became rare. Visits shortened. My presence started to feel scheduled, managed, tolerated rather than desired. I stood up and walked through my apartment, touching familiar objects as if seeing them for the first time. The framed photos on the wall stopped abruptly after a certain year. New pictures of the kids lived on Claire's social media, not in my home. Christmas gifts grew impersonal. A blender. A gift card. Safe, thoughtless items that required no emotional effort. I realized how carefully I had been placed in a box labeled useful but quiet. The realization hurt more than the message at the port. That message had been sharp and sudden. This understanding was slow and suffocating. I had been reduced without protest. Not because they were cruel, but because I made it easy. I had never said no.
Never demanded inclusion. Never risked discomfort.
I believed that love meant endurance. I believed that if I stayed gentle, stayed generous, stayed available, I would be kept close. Instead, I had trained them to see me as a resource, not a person. I returned to my desk and opened my laptop, not with anger but with a strange clarity. I searched for the attorney who had helped me years ago with estate planning. His name appeared immediately. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the phone number. Part of me whispered that calling a lawyer meant crossing a line. That it meant becoming cold, selfish, unforgiving. Another part of me, quieter but stronger, reminded me that boundaries are not cruelty. They are survival. When the call connected, my voice surprised me. It was steady. Controlled. I explained the situation simply. I owned the house. My son lived there. There was no written agreement transferring ownership. The lawyer confirmed what I already knew. Legally, the house was mine. Entirely. I could sell it, rent it, reclaim it.
When I ended the call, I sat there breathing slowly, feeling something unfamiliar settle in my chest.
It was not rage. It was resolve. As evening fell, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and stepped onto the small balcony overlooking the street. Cars passed.
Neighbors laughed somewhere below.
Life continued, indifferent to my quiet awakening. I realized how long it had been since I had thought about myself without immediately thinking of Ethan first. Who I was before motherhood. Before obligation swallowed identity.
I remembered dancing in my 20s. Traveling dreams abandoned.
Interests slowly erased because they did not fit the role of a good mother. That message at the port had not just excluded me from a vacation. It had forced me to confront a truth I had avoided for years. I had allowed my worth to be measured by what I provided. Money, time, emotional labor. And when those were not immediately needed, I was set aside.
Sitting there with my tea growing cold, I understood something fundamental.
If I did not change, nothing would. They would continue to take and I would continue to disappear. That night, for the first time since the cruise terminal, I did not cry. I did not pray for understanding or wait for an apology that might never come. I opened a notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of the page. This is where I choose myself. I did not know yet what that choice would cost or where it would lead. I only knew that returning to who I had been was no longer possible. The morning after that realization, I woke up before sunrise with a strange sensation in my body. It was not peace, and it was not anger. It was something sharper and cleaner, like air after a storm. For years, my mornings had begun with routine thoughts about other people. What Ethan needed. Whether the kids had school events. If Claire might require help. That day, for the first time in decades, the first thought that entered my mind was simple and unfamiliar. What do I need to do today? I made coffee and sat at the small kitchen table, the blue folder beside my cup like a silent companion. I opened it again, slower this time, reading every page as if it belonged to someone else.
My name.
My signature. My responsibility. My asset. I realized how often I had minimized my own contributions, calling them help, calling them support, calling them temporary. I had never allowed myself to call them ownership. That word felt heavy but honest. I did not rush into anything. That surprised even me. There was no dramatic decision fueled by rage. There was calculation. I called my old friend Linda, a real estate agent I had known for years, someone who had watched Ethan grow up. When she answered, her voice warm and familiar, I hesitated for just a second before speaking. I told her I needed to sell a house quickly. I did not explain why. She did not ask. There was a pause, then a quiet understanding in her tone. She said it could be done. That afternoon, I drove to the house. I had a key, one Ethan insisted I keep for emergencies. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I felt like an intruder in a place I had paid for but never truly belonged. The house smelled different than I remembered. New candles. Different furniture. None of my taste remained. I walked slowly from room to room, not touching anything, just observing. In the living room, I noticed how the family photos stopped including me somewhere along the timeline. I appeared in the early frames, holding babies, smiling stiffly. Then I vanished. In the guest room, the quilt I had hand-sewn for them was folded and stored in the closet, replaced by something trendy and impersonal. I sat on the edge of the bed and let that sink in. It was not cruelty. It was erasure. Quiet. Efficient.
Almost polite.
I understood then that if I had died, my absence would have been managed just as smoothly. I checked drawers and cabinets, not searching for leverage but for clarity. In Ethan's home office, inside a drawer he probably assumed I would never open, I found a folded document. A draft of a property transfer agreement. Dated months earlier. Unsigned. My name typed neatly at the bottom, waiting.
Waiting for pressure. Waiting for guilt.
Waiting for the right emotional moment to be presented as reasonable and fair. I placed the paper back carefully and took a photo with my phone.
Not for revenge.
For truth. When Linda brought potential buyers 2 days later, I stayed invisible. I waited in my car while they walked through the house, listening to their muffled voices through the windows.
They admired the light.
The layout.
The neighborhood.
They spoke about future plans.
A life beginning.
I felt nothing but calm. When Linda told me they were offering cash, above market value, with a fast closing, I nodded. My hands did not shake. My heart did not race. I was not taking something away. I was reclaiming something that had never stopped being mine. Paperwork followed quickly. Meetings.
Signatures.
Legal confirmations. Each step felt strangely grounding, like placing my feet back on solid ground after years of floating. The lawyer handled the technical details. I focused on breathing, on sleeping, on eating meals without checking my phone. I did not answer Ethan's messages when they came. They were casual.
Vacation photos. The kids smiling.
Nothing about the message at the port.
Nothing about me.
The night before the sale finalized, I returned to the empty house one last time. Their belongings had already been moved into storage. The rooms echoed when I walked. I stood in the center of the living room and did something I had not done in years. I played music. I danced slowly, alone, in a space that had never truly been mine emotionally but always had been legally. It was not celebration. It was release. With every step, I felt roles falling away. The endlessly available mother.
The silent supporter. The woman who accepted crumbs as connection.
When I left the house and locked the door, I did not look back. The next morning, the sale closed. The money arrived in my account.
Numbers on a screen.
Proof. Not of wealth, but of agency. I sat at my kitchen table again, coffee untouched, and opened my laptop. Without consulting anyone, without asking permission, I searched for flights. Paris appeared on the screen. I had dreamed of it once. Long ago. I clicked purchase. That was the moment I understood something essential. This was not about punishing my son. This was about saving myself. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel guilty for choosing action over tears. The day the cruise ship returned to port, I did not go anywhere near the terminal. I did not stand among the families waving signs or scanning faces for familiar smiles. I already knew what they would look like. Sunburned. Relaxed. Happy. I had no desire to see that happiness collide with what awaited them. Instead, I stayed home and waited, not with anticipation, but with a heavy calm that felt earned. The house was already gone by then. The new owners had the keys. Their names were on the documents. The rooms that once echoed with my grandchildren's voices were already being repainted, reorganized, rewritten into a different life. What remained was one thing I still needed to do. I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. Not an angry letter.
Not a dramatic one. A precise one.
I explained the facts clearly. That the house had always been in my name. That I had finished paying the mortgage with my retirement savings. That the sale was legal, complete, irreversible. I explained why. I wrote about the message at the port. About being told I was not family enough. I did not beg them to understand. I simply told the truth. I arranged their belongings to be stored safely and prepaid the fees. I left the storage address and key information with my attorney. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter of the empty house, along with copies of the deed and sale contract.
I wanted there to be no confusion, no room for denial.
Then I left. That evening, my phone began to vibrate. Missed calls. Messages. I did not open them. I turned the phone face down and made myself dinner. I ate slowly. I slept deeply.
The next morning, the doorbell rang.
When I opened the door, Ethan stood there alone. His face looked different.
Pale. Unsteady.
Gone was the relaxed confidence of a man returning from vacation. He looked like someone who had just discovered the ground beneath him was not solid. He did not greet me. He did not ask how I was. His first words were sharp and wounded.
How could you do this?
You sold our house. I stepped aside and let him in. I waited until he finished speaking. I waited until the anger ran out of breath. Then I spoke quietly. It was never your house, Ethan. It was mine. Always was. It says so on the papers you never bothered to read. He ran his hands through his hair, pacing my living room like a stranger. We lived there.
The kids grew up there.
You didn't even talk to us. You didn't give us a chance. I looked at him and felt something painful but clear. For the first time, he was not speaking to me as a son speaks to a mother. He was speaking as someone who had lost an asset. You didn't give me a chance either, I said. Not at the port. Not in the message. Not in the years before that. You decided I wasn't family when it was convenient. I decided to stop being convenient. He sat down heavily on the couch. Claire is devastated, he said, as if that should end the conversation. I asked him gently how he thought I felt reading that message alone, surrounded by strangers, watching my own family sail away without me. He was silent. Where are we supposed to go now? He asked finally. Did you think about the kids? That question hit me harder than the rest. Not because it was unfair, but because it revealed everything. Even now, the focus was not on the hurt he caused, but on the inconvenience I created. I answered honestly. You have 3 months of storage paid and time to find a place. You both work. You'll manage. And yes, I thought about the kids. I thought about what they learn watching how you treat your own mother. He looked at me as if I were someone he no longer recognized. Maybe I was. The woman he had known would have softened by then. Apologized. Backtracked. Offered compromise. That woman had been left at the port. I told him I was leaving for Paris. Soon. Not for a visit. Not for a break. For myself. He stared at me, stunned. You serious? I nodded. I am done waiting to be included. I am choosing a life where I don't have to beg for my place. He left without another word. When the door closed behind him, I stood still for a long time. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel cruel. I felt something quieter and heavier. Consequence. The kind that arrives not as punishment, but as reality finally catching up. That night, I packed my suitcase again. This time, I knew exactly where I was going. And why. Paris did not greet me with celebration. It greeted me with rain. A thin, persistent drizzle that blurred the streets and softened the edges of buildings, as if the city itself understood that I had arrived not to be dazzled, but to be changed. As the taxi moved through narrow streets, I watched the unfamiliar signs, the old stone, the muted colors, and felt something loosen in my chest.
No one here knew me as Ethan's mother.
No one expected anything from me. I was simply an older woman with a suitcase and a tired face, and that anonymity felt like freedom. I stayed at my sister Eleanor's apartment at first. She had lived between Paris and New York for decades, a life I once quietly judged as selfish and impractical. Now, I watched her move through her space with ease and confidence and wondered how different my own life might have been if I had allowed myself that same ownership of time. She never asked me what I planned to do next. She simply made space. A room. A shelf in the fridge. Silence when I needed it. The first days passed slowly.
I walked without destination.
I sat in cafes alone, not scrolling through my phone, not waiting for messages. I observed people. Older women laughing loudly. Couples arguing openly.
Artists painting bridges with frozen fingers.
Life existed here without apology. I realized how long I had lived quietly, carefully, minimizing myself so I would not disturb anyone else's comfort. One afternoon, while wandering through a small neighborhood near Montmartre, I passed a window filled with watercolor paintings. Soft colors.
Imperfect lines. Something pulled me inside.
I remembered suddenly the girl I once was, the one who painted until her fingers cramped, before responsibility replaced curiosity. I signed up for a class without overthinking it. No one questioned my age. No one asked why now. They simply handed me a brush. The first painting was clumsy. Colors bled into each other. Lines refused to obey. I felt embarrassed at first, then strangely alive. The instructor, an old man with paint-stained hands, told us that watercolor is about letting go. You guide the water, he said, but you never control it. The sentence stayed with me. I realized I had spent my life trying to control outcomes through sacrifice, believing it would secure love. Here, I was learning to allow unpredictability. Evenings became mine. Sometimes I ate with Eleanor and her friends, people who spoke passionately about books, politics, art, without once asking about my children. Other nights, I stayed in, painting until midnight, music low, windows open to the sound of rain and distant laughter. My phone stayed mostly off. When I did turn it on, I saw messages from home. Some angry.
Some confused.
Some apologetic. I did not respond immediately. For the first time, silence was not punishment. It was protection. I rented a small studio apartment after 2 weeks. Just one room.
Wooden floors. Tall windows.
A space that belonged entirely to me. Signing that lease felt more meaningful than any document I had signed before. It was temporary, yes, but it was chosen. I arranged the furniture slowly. Bought cheap brushes. Hung my first finished painting on the wall, crooked and imperfect and mine. I spoke to my grandchildren on video calls, laughing and listening, but I no longer allowed the conversation to drift toward guilt or expectation. When Ethan asked when I was coming back, I told him honestly, I don't know. That answer frightened him more than anger ever could. And for the first time, I did not rush to comfort his discomfort. As weeks passed, something shifted inside me. The constant tension I had carried for years began to dissolve. I slept deeply.
I ate when hungry. I walked until tired.
I stopped measuring my worth by how useful I was. I began to remember myself. Not as a role. Not as a service. As a woman who still had desires, curiosity, and time. One night, standing by my window, brush in hand, looking out at the lights reflected on wet pavement, I understood that selling the house had not been the transformation. It had only opened the door. This was the change. This quiet rebuilding. This permission to exist without explanation. I had not abandoned my family. I had returned to myself. I knew I would return long before I booked the ticket. Paris was not an escape, and I had never pretended it was. It was a mirror. It showed me who I was when no one was pulling at my sleeves, asking for more than I had left to give. When the winter light began to thin and the days grew shorter, I felt a quiet readiness settle in me.
Not obligation.
Not guilt. Readiness. The difference mattered. Before leaving, I packed slowly, deliberately. I wrapped my paintings in brown paper, careful with each corner, as if they were proof of something fragile and newly born. Eleanor watched from the doorway, arms crossed, smiling in that knowing way of hers. She did not ask if I was sure. She never had. At the airport, she hugged me tightly and whispered that reinvention has no age limit. I carried those words with me onto the plane.
When I landed back in Florida, the air felt heavier, warmer, familiar.
Ethan and the kids waited near the arrival gate. He looked nervous, older somehow. The children ran to me without hesitation, their arms wrapping around my waist with the kind of certainty adults forget how to give. Claire stood a few steps back, reserved but present.
I hugged them all, feeling affection without surrender.
That balance was new. I did not move back in with them. I had already rented a small apartment nearby.
1 bedroom. Sunlight in the mornings.
A spare corner I turned into a painting space. When Ethan realized this was permanent, not temporary, I saw disappointment flicker across his face. But he said nothing. That silence was progress. We began again carefully. Sunday lunches sometimes, not every week. Afternoons with the grandchildren without parental supervision, as I had requested.
I set boundaries out loud.
I said no when I meant no. I said yes when it felt right, not when it felt expected. It was uncomfortable at first.
For all of us.
Especially for me. Guilt does not disappear just because you understand it. One evening, months after my return, Ethan sat across from me at my small kitchen table. The kids were asleep. Claire had gone home. He looked at my paintings leaning against the wall. He was quiet for a long time before he spoke. "I never thanked you," he said.
Not for the house. Not for the money.
For forcing me to see myself. His voice cracked slightly. If you had stayed silent, I would have kept taking. I didn't know how to stop. I did not tell him it was okay. I did not rush to forgive. I simply nodded. Acknowledgement was enough. Life settled into something new. Not perfect. Not simple. But honest. I painted 3 times a week. I made friends who knew nothing about my past sacrifices.
I traveled alone when I wanted.
For my 63rd birthday, Ethan and Claire gave me a gift I never expected. A trip to Italy. A painting workshop in Tuscany. The card said thank you for choosing yourself. Standing in my apartment that night, holding the envelope, I felt a quiet completeness. The woman I had been was not gone. She had evolved. Stronger. Clearer.
Visible.
I am still a mother. Still a grandmother. But I am also Margaret. And this time, I do not disappear.